Well, I hope you didn't think this is over, now with at least 3 more parts to cover. And hey, this is the part where the story really kicks off. Parts 1 and 2 were the foundation for the characters, but also kind of a prologue in a way for the larger story that's about to play out. And we're returning to form, where part 3 sort of mirrors part 1 in a way with a greater focus on characters and a goal, all before launching into the utter insanity that is this world's politics and lore, both of which will greatly impact Rosemind, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Why don't you go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button if you're enjoying these videos from me. It actually helps me out quite a bit. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dig into Part 3, Volume 1, Adopted Daughter of an Archduke. Now the prologue begins with Karud's perspective, following Sylvester piecing on out of this story to get back to the Archduke Conference. That leaves him and Ferdinand to hammer out the details more on Sylvester's improvised Rosemind backstory. Man has a good reason for him to adopt her, but they'll need another push to really sell it, and decide to play up her helping the orphans, thus beginning the longest running gag of the series, as well as plot point, the sainthood of Rosemind. It'll also justify her appointment as the new High Bishop. Karud can't really imagine her being that saintly, but that's because he knows her, and hey, as long as she stays on script, she'll easily pass as someone saint-like. Education comes first though. Even if Ferdinand's gotten her mostly there, she's not quite good enough to pass for an archnoble, and she'll need the backing of a strong woman to support her in noble society, especially at tea parties in the woman's side of politics, where men can't tread. Since Veronica is out of the picture, this leads to the outcast faction led by Elvira and Sylvester's wife to fill in the power vacuum, so they decide to enlist Elvira's help. But Ferdinand's gonna have to be the one to smooth that over, since due to all that drama with Rosemary, Elvira's still not too keen on Karud. So they decide on dinner tomorrow to convince her, and on the way out, bump into Daniel where they commend him for holding out against an archnoble for as long as he did. So he's not getting punished, good for him. The next day, they interrogate prisoners, and Karud just hopes he's not a mana match for Bindewald to look into his memories with the magic tool Ferdinand used on mine. But dinner comes up before too long, and Karud broaches the subject with the grace of a bull in a china shop, and casually drops that his daughter's going to be baptized soon and that she's Rosemary's daughter, to which Elvira laughs because she knows that's a load of shit. She also scolds him for trying to reignite the feud between his second wife and Rosemary's family by introducing a daughter. So yeah, she won't allow her to be baptized as Karud's daughter. Or at least she wouldn't if Ferdinand wasn't involved. He tells her the girl is his protege and they need Elvira's help. She suggests that while she may be Rosemary's daughter, they won't announce that, and Elvira will instead claim her on her baptism. In noble society, that's what matters. Whoever claims you on your baptism. So it's settled, and luckily for them, Elvira always wanted a daughter, and prepares the room quickly. Back to the temple sometime later, and Rosemind enters Ferdinand's room for a medical exam. He's been dying to figure out what's up with her body, since it's so different from a normal noble or devouring child with how weak she is, but also how her body always needs a flow of mana. But Rosemind gets scolded when she stutters greeting her new father. Ferdinand also instructs her that she needs to call him by his name now, not High Priest. He then tells her to strip, but she hides behind Karud, and even he's a bit apprehensive at that. Ferdinand isn't sure where the shyness is coming from, considering she wasn't shy when they bathed together, casually omitting that he meant in her memories when he was looking through them with the magic tool. And that's gonna raise a red flag, causing Ferdinand of all people to get flustered for a rare moment. However, after some struggle, Ferdinand catches her, strips her naked, despite her pleas, and Karud feels bad. But they lay it out that this is a medical exam to see what's up with her mana flow, and that'll hopefully lead to a cure. So she's now gonna go along with it. I mean, she isn't fully naked. They only take off her top and have her face away from them, that way they can see some glowing lines on her back. Once the exam is underway, they come to the obvious conclusion that she's died before. No shit. Over to Rosemind's perspective, she has clumps of hardened mana in her chest around her heart, which she guesses stores mana in this world. That's also what face stones are, hardened mana from when a living creature dies. So her having hardened mana in a bunch of places means she's died before, hence why she needs the constant flow, or she either overheats or cools off and becomes paralyzed when she doesn't have enough, because they guess that the clumps are blocking her flow of mana entirely. Now she can't pinpoint exactly when she died because she's come so close so many times it's hard to count. But what they can tell is that these are old, and most likely from when Arana woke up inside mine, so she doesn't really care when she died and asks Ferdinand if he can fix it. But he tells her it won't be difficult for him, but for her it's gonna be a pain, because she'll need to gather the ingredients herself and brew her own potion. Yeah, this isn't like the nasty stuff he's been making her drink. Her mana itself is necessary in creating this potion, so she has to do all the final gathering. But to do that, she'll need a high beast first. So now Mine's list of crap to do is learn to be an archnoble, etiquette, and also magic lessons on top of that. So they'll have to pick spots to gather stuff in Ehrenfest. The duchy, not the duke. And it also has to be high quality stuff because this mana hardened so long ago. Now what makes it high quality is the amount and density of mana, which there are different types of following the elements of the Eternal Five and the King and Queen. Brushing all that aside, Rosemine's dismissed to prepare to leave for Cardstedt's estate in 3 days, while Cardstedt and Ferdinand plan ingredients to gather. Outside the chambers, Fran and Damiel are waiting, and Rosemine and Damiel are struggling a bit because their statuses drastically shifted overnight, where she now outranks him. Made things kinda awkward. Inside her old chamber still, Monica and Nicola have fully replaced Rosina and Delia, the former now being Rosemine's personal musician, and the latter banished to the orphanage as punishment for Bezewant's trouble. Cardstedt gave her some noble clothes, as well as some for Ella and Rosina, while Rosina is choosing decorations for the new High Bishop's chambers, and also drilling as much etiquette as she can into Rosemine before they leave, which comes quick. So they take a carriage on up to the Nobles' Quarter where it's spotless. The mansions get fancier the further away from the gate one gets because you're getting closer to the castle at that point, which is where Sylvester and soon Rosemine will live. We also learn that carriages aren't the most common method of travel for nobles, despite being less bumpy because of magic tools, because adults and those in the Royal Academy fly everywhere by high beast. Basically, if you're younger than 10, that's the only time you're gonna ride in a carriage. Oh, well I guess commoner servants use them too. There's a section with large, tightly packed buildings, and those seem to be out of place, at least compared to all the estates with massive gardens around them. Yeah, those are for the landowning nobles who come to the city during winter for socializing. They don't really need gardens because their shit's covered under snow. However, what we learn is that Cardstedt's estate is damn close to the castle wall, pretty much right on top of it, meaning he's of high importance. Obviously, once they're on the estate grounds, it takes forever to get to the main building because that's how big the garden is. But we do see some other houses dotting the land, which is where we learn that servants, and even the larger one, is where his second wife lives. At the main house, she spots her new mother to greet her, Elvira, and Ferdinand tells Rosemine to get along with her, as Elvira will dictate her acceptance in noble society, which neither Ferdinand nor Cardstedt can guarantee because they're men. But also, Elvira's not so stupid that she's going to mistreat the future daughter of the Archduke. And also, this is her first daughter, so she's pretty excited. So the big fancy noble greeting happens, and Rosemine, while a bit rough around the edges, gets a passing mark, and Elvira takes to her quite well, especially since she can talk to her about girly stuff and dress her up in cute clothes. That's what she was looking forward to anyway. Rosemine's life in the noble quarter begins with some shocking revelations. One minor thing is the toilet situation, as nobles have like this slime monster in an actual toilet that dissolves waste through an underground sewer network, rather than chamber pots like commoners do. Nobles also bathe every day in hot water, which she missed. However, all the soap is starting to dry out her hair, so she asks Elvira to summon the Gilberta Company for some rinsham. Elvira is a bit apprehensive at this, since at best, the Gilberta Company is doing business with lay nobles and their archnobles, so yeah, that's beneath them. But Rosemine convinces her with the promise of silky hair. Mark and Benno come with some samples, and Elvira is pretty taken with it. But Rosemine suggests some paper with pressed flowers for letters of invitation. And she's less thrilled about that, as archnobles are meant to start trends themselves, not follow them, especially since lay nobles are probably already purchasing this shit. However, Benno tells her that they're just now debuting this paper today, as a bit of special service for herself and Lady Rosemine. So, since it's pretty exclusive, Elvira bites. Next is hairpins, and despite the samples Benno brought, Elvira wanted higher quality threads, which are already higher quality threads than Rosemine is using currently, but Benno tells her they accept custom orders, so they can make ones to perfectly match any outfit and leave a lasting impression. Elvira orders some, and Benno successfully made an archnoble client. Now tea time between Elvira and Rosemine is where they talk beauty and gossip, which Elvira just loves to talk about Ferdinand because she has a massive lady boner for him. Oh, Ella's sweets are also a huge hit here. Rosemine's pretty sure Elvira wants to milk her for recipes to use during her own tea parties, and allows Ella to enter the main kitchen to assist in preparing meals. Ferdinand drops by every 2 days to check on Rosemine, which keeps Elvira in a great mood, and I'm sure this little tidbit seems weird, and yeah, it kind of is, but no noble wife considers this cheating because Ferdinand, despite being really attractive on paper, is a celibate priest and was badmouthed by Veronica for over a decade. Nobody's gonna want to marry him, and even if they wanted to, his mana capacity's so high, nobody actually could. So Cornelius, Kardstet's third son from Elvira and Mine's new older brother who's an 11-year-old apprentice knight, confirms that Elvira has been in a pretty good mood lately. Now during their talks, Rosemine tried to dismiss Ferdinand as an evil schemer, but turns out that's actually a turn-on in noble society, as any man who can't weave plots to crush his enemies is absolutely worthless in politics. The hard part for Rosemine currently is learning all the noble names that she'll be related to come the baptism. Yeah, between Kardstet's family, the knights, and the scholars' names in the castle. So to bribe her, Ferdinand offers her the key to the temple bookroom, which will be hers anyway once she's the high bishop, but Rosemine doesn't care. That's a hell of a motivator. When it comes to outfits for the baptism, Rosemine is changed into a ton by Elvira, as she chooses which one to get. Now we all know Rosemine by this point, she doesn't have any fucking interest in this shit, but she watches Elvira keenly to see her reactions and says she can't decide between two outfits, which was actually Elvira's dilemma. Kardstet pops in and says order both, and decide on the day of, which Rosemine's calming her roots show by whispering to him that that's a waste of money. But Kardstet just shrugs that off, saying he doesn't care, because it'll save him the headache of listening to Elvira complain later, wishing she had bought the other outfit. First world problems, am I right? Now it's the day before the big baptism, and Rosemine is dragged by Cornelius to meet her two eldest brothers, Eckhart and Lamprecht. However, they know her already, because they both participated in the Trombe extermination in part 2. So they're surprised to learn that the small shrine maiden was actually their sister the whole time. Kardstet's family is so deeply interwoven into the Archdukes, it's not even funny. Kardstet effectively serves as Sylvester's guard knight most of the time. Eckhart's actually sworn to serve Ferdinand despite him being in the temple now. Lamprecht is Sylvester's eldest son's guard. And now Cornelius is being assigned to Rosemine once she's adopted. So now that we've been introduced to most of the nobles we'll be dealing with from now on, let's go ahead and kick this story off proper, eh? The day of the ceremony's here, and nobles have it different than commoners. Rosemine's woken up super early to get bathed and sent off to breakfast. There she talks to Eckhart for a bit, where he says that this is Ferdinand's first time agreeing to perform a baptism ceremony for a noble. Why? Well, nobles summon priests to their homes for baptisms rather than sending their children to the temple like commoners do. As such, they summon priests from high-status families. They also get paid for that service, so it's a valuable source of income for blue robes. Beze once typically handled the arch-noble children himself, as he was technically the highest status in the temple. And Ferdinand also didn't really care to do the ceremonies in the first place. He's about as rich as they come and just had better shit to do. But this one's special as he's currently the highest status priest in the temple, and Rosemine's guardian, so he's gonna do it. Eckhart asks Rosemine to take care of Ferdinand, and he'll take care of her as his little sister, implying he knows quite a bit more about her than just, this is my dad's secret daughter, because he does. After Rosemine gets changed for her ceremony, Ferdinand drops by beforehand to give her a gift. Inside of a wooden box is an extra special hairpin that she can immediately tell was made by her lower city family, because they'd already discussed such a design. Immediately she starts to cry, and Ferdinand has to clear the room. He tries to calm her down as best as he can, but Rosemine just won't stop crying, and she tells him that this is all his fault because, dude, you gave her a hairpin from her lower city family right before her new baptism. What the fuck? He says okay, he won't give her any more gifts in the future, and she says that he should actually give her more. Not less. It's just that it's been like less than a month since she was ripped away from her family at this point. She's barely emotionally stable, so shoving this in her face without warning before a big ceremony just isn't okay. Once she stops crying though, Ferdinand tells people they can come back in, and Lamprecht is the first person to see Rosemine's eyes are all red and puffy. Now that's gonna ruin her big day looking like she was just crying, so Ferdinand solves the problem with a quick healing spell, which everyone acts like is a big deal. But Ferdinand brushes it off as just something minor. They rush off, Rosemine gets her hair all gelled up and braided before the new hair stick is slid in, and the ceremony kicks off with a slight word of warning from Elvira about how important first impressions are in noble society. Squeals come from the main chamber as Ferdinand enters, as all the noble women are seeing him in his fancy priest clothes for the first time, to which Rosemine attributes this as a uniform fetish-like phenomenon. They're not used to seeing it, so I guess it's super hot. When she enters the hall behind Kardstet and Elvira, she sees about 200 or 300 people there, and has to walk gracefully in front of all of them up to a small stage with Ferdinand. In front of the stage is Sylvester, his wife we're not yet introduced to, and a boy about her age, as well as her brothers from Kardstet's family. Elvira and Kardstet sit next to them after Rosemine is on stage with Ferdinand. and he states that she has turned 7. He pulls out a citizenship plate, and this triggers some PTSD, as she remembers her first baptism with the knife and blood pressing. Yeah, she don't want to do that, so she ends up grimacing a bit, but Ferdinand narrows his eyes and hands her a magic tool instead of a knife. She presses the stick magic tool to the metal, and it shines every color of the rainbow, and Ferdinand mutters to himself that he expected as much. After stashing that away, he declares that she's officially been recognized as a citizen, as well as Kardstedt's daughter. So Kardstedt stands up and hands her the magic ring that he had to take away from her earlier, because this is when noble children are supposed to get it, and he gave it to her before, but they have to play it off that he's just now giving it to her. Semantic shit. He then announces that she is his daughter to all the nobles present. Ferdinand offers her a small blessing, raining down blue light upon her, and Rosemine was told that she needs to bless the audience as well as the priest. So she does just that. And when a huge blessing goes off, it causes a huge stir in the crowd. Worried, Rosemine thinks she just screwed up, but Ferdinand and Kardstedt are smiling. The latter finally tells her in a standard ceremony, the child only blesses the priest. But this'll cement a reason for Sylvester to adopt her, which he does immediately. He jumps up on stage, congratulates her on her baptism, and declares that he's adopting her then and there. He begins to explain to the onlooking nobles, who were definitely not aware this was going to happen, that she has a ton of mana, which is why Kardstedt hid her in the temple to keep her safe, leading to Bezewant's misunderstanding and calling her a commoner. He says that she's basically a saint who revolutionized the orphanage in the temple to save those poor kids' lives. He didn't believe it until he had to go and see it for himself, obviously, and her novel inventions are going to be a new industry in the duchy, so she's going to be brought into the Archduke family to help all that kick off. Also, because of Bezewant's crimes and the lack of priests, he's appointing Rosemine to the role of High Bishop to help out with ceremonies. So with those reasons listed out, the nobles all buy it, and Rosemine's adopted immediately with a magic contract to seal the deal. Ferdinand had it drafted up already. Sylvester pulls out a useful magic tool that's basically a fountain pen that runs on mana, and when Rosemine signs it, she wishes she could keep the pen. But Sylvester flat out tells her to give it back, because that's his. Kardstedt finally picks her up and instructs her to wave, which she does. Now I know what you're all thinking. Magic contracts are awfully limited, being effective in only the city, but that's only true for common or merchant contracts. Noble contracts affect the whole duchy, and there are even country-wide contracts, as, yes, Ehrenfest is a duchy inside a larger country with a king. So now Rosemine has to greet people as the newly baptized and recently adopted daughter of the Archduke. And first is Sylvester's family, where we meet his first and currently only wife, Florencia. She's the anchor that keeps the madness that is Sylvester grounded, and is an overall charming person who has a bit of a playful streak in her. His eldest and so far only baptized son, Wilfred, is also with them. Wilfred at this stage is just a mini Sylvester. He looks just like him except for his hair color. He's also 1 season older, on paper and not actually, and is personable enough to tell Rosemine that she's as much a sister to him as his blood sister Charlotte. That's a running theme in his family, that their familial connections are stronger than blood. Think about it. Sylvester really prioritizes Ferdinand's opinion above all else, despite being his half-brother, and Rosemine's welcomed into the family without much thought. And hey, now that you think about it, that's pretty true for Rosemine as well, that blood's not the main factor to her. Now that the Archduke has been greeted, it's time to greet other people. 2 being her new knights, as she'll need constant guards as a member of the archducal family. 1 she recognizes because it's Damuel, which might seem like a blessing at first, as a lay noble would normally never guard the Archduke's adopted daughter, but from an outside perspective, he could be fired at any moment with his track record. The other is a woman she doesn't quite know yet, named Bridget. We learn quite a bit about her in this part, even in a few chapters, so I'll save that for later. However, Wilfred is ready to cause some trouble, as he sneaks up to Rosemine and drags her away from her job of greeting people to play. Yeah, Ferdinand brushes this off, telling her to go play, which seems fucking weird, but when Wilfred starts running and Rosemine begs him to slow down because she can't keep up and she's out of breath already, and he tells her that she has to be fast in order to escape her tutors, and literally ends up dragging her across the ground to the point that she gets scrapes all over her head and down her knees, all before she passes out. Yeah, that was pretty obviously planned. And of course, Ferdinand orchestrated this. Now, it wasn't his idea as we learn later, but this was to teach the harsh lesson for Wilfred and his guard knights, that Rosemine is not healthy and can die in an instant if not watched over carefully. Now this is important, as once she's in the castle, this sort of misstep could lead to executions. Yeah, even though this does frame Ferdinand as a guy cruel enough to traumatize a child to get the results he wants, it was still pretty necessary. Probably save more lives in the long run. Ferdinand concludes that they'll leave for the temple in 2 days for the High Bishop's inauguration ceremony. Karud hangs back though and asks Rosemine if she did something to Daniel with her blessing. His man is growing again, which shouldn't be possible as he's past his growth period, so he asks her not to tell Sylvester or Ferdinand about this, as the former would tease Daniel to death, possibly quite literally, and the latter would throw Daniel under a bus to get away from Sylvester's teasing himself, so she'll keep it a secret. While resting up, Lamprecht comes to apologize on his and Wilfred's behalf, but Rosemine brushes it off, saying that Ferdinand let it happen as a lesson to be careful with her. Now she actually regrets not being able to tell them on her own terms, but Lamprecht takes that to mean that she's just that compassionate, that even though she nearly died, she's only showing concern for those who harmed her. At least in his head. He hands her a book as a form of apology as well, which Ferdinand suggested and he doesn't think is much of an apology until Rosemine lights up and happily takes it. She reads, relaxes the rest of the day and the next, before going to the temple with her new guards. She talks to Bridget about going to the temple in Lower City, and we learn that she's the sister of a landowning med-noble Geeb over the Providence of Ilgner. So she's passed through the Lower City before, but has never stayed there long. Daniel throws her a bone saying the temple isn't so bad, but the Lower City itself will be rough for a woman. At the temple, Rosemine introduces her attendants to her guards, and gets a glimpse at her new fairy tale-like High Bishop's chambers. Chambers were also secured for Bridget and Daniel, and while his look normal, how they decorate the female knights' rooms in the barracks, which they do themselves, is entirely dependent on the woman, because, they customize it. And ultimately Karud decided on a motif similar to Rosemine's, which is a bit much, but Bridget reassures her it'll be fine. So she gets dressed in her new High Bishop's robes, which Monica does, and says she understands that Rosemine probably isn't that happy using the old ones that Beze wants to use. But Rosemine doesn't really care about that. I mean, she grew up in the Lower City. Hand-me-downs are nothing new. She's more upset her workshop crest isn't on them, and instead has the crest of the Archduke, which makes Monica praise her for her kindness. Ferdinand now comes to Rosemine's chambers instead of the other way around, since she's higher status in the temple, and she's inaugurated right away as the High Bishop, which is an internal ritual with just the blue robes. So, there's not much to prepare. It's also being rushed, so they can hear reports from Benno about the nearby city's orphanage. Also go to the Italian restaurant. The ceremony is basically Ferdinand just saying Beze Wanst was dismissed, and a new one was appointed, and her name is Rosemine, the adopted daughter of the Archduke. So Rosemine walks in and about half of the 10 blue robes are barely interested, while the other half look like their eyes are about to pop out of their sockets. One speaks up that she's a commoner, what the hell's she doing there? And Ferdinand repeats the tried and tested line that Beze Wanst was an idiot, and he misunderstood. They then say that Ferdinand should have known because, well, he's fucking smarter, and he also called her a commoner too, but Ferdinand's got an excuse lined up. He replies that he only knew what the bishop knew, and if he didn't know, how was Ferdinand supposed to? Basically, the strategy going forward is blame everything on the old High Bishop. Yeah, he was a massive criminal. People are sure to believe it. Rosemine then tells them that if they doubt her, they can sure as shit go ask her two fathers, the Archduke and Knights Commander. So getting on with it, they pray and end the ceremony. On the way out, Rosemine remembers the face of the guy who wrecked the Bookworm back in part 2, and crushes him a little bit with a subtle threat. In private, Ferdinand scolds her for that, but she says that she learned it from him. She smiles brightly and says she's being rational, and Ferdinand smiles back brightly as well, saying that her rationality is spurred by emotion, and that makes it all the more terrifying. I just love moments like this, because it really demonstrates how much these two have come to know each other. But now that the inauguration is out of the way, Rosemine demands the key to the bookroom from Ferdinand, and he hands it over. He is a man of his word, but Fran steps between her and the door because she can't go ahead and bury herself in books just yet. She has to study prayers for the upcoming Starbind ceremony, and the next day kicks off her fresh new hell of starting the printing industry in force with the Gilberta Company. Bridget steps up when she sees the mountain of boards stacked in front of Rosemine to study, saying that's way too much for a child that's just been baptized. But Fran stresses that she has to perform her duties perfectly, or else it'll be a stain on her in noble society. That makes Bridget back down, understanding all too well, more so than we know at this point, and Rosemine gets cracking. The next day, Rosemine and Ferdinand meet with the Gilberta Company, so Ferdinand can hear the reports before the scholars have a chance to mess with them. He also tells her to hold out and act like a noble until he leaves, and then she can soothe her aching heart inside her hidden room. When Lutz walks into the orphanage director's chambers, she can't help but wave, causing a quick rebuke from Ferdinand, but she behaves after that. Benno gives the report that the orphanages they're planning to utilize in other cities are run differently than the one in the capital of the duchy. as they don't have temples. Having blue robes in every province would be a chore, and also negate the need for spring prayer. So the local mayors use the orphans as slave labor. However, they can go gather in the forest to survive. This also means they have a different outlook than the temple, so they're going to be harder to incorporate into the existing structure. There's also a good chance the mayor would just start stealing the workshop's profits if they made some. So Rosemine asks to confirm if this would be a government-owned business, basically asking if the government would fork out the cost, since the Archduke is backing it. And Ferdinand says that's obvious, but Benno says the scholars are trying to crush it. Remember that lay nobles and maybe even some poorer med nobles make a living off transcribing books, so these scholars want it to fail because that's their livelihood. After the business talks, Ferdinand leaves, Bridget gets lunch, letting Lutz and Benno meet with Rosemine in private, with Daniel and Gil accompanying her. She immediately leaps into Lutz's arms for a hug, and Benno laughs, telling him that she hasn't changed at all. He also accidentally calls her mine, and she corrects him, saying that he has to call her Rosemine now. She then asks Benno to rain some thunder down on her because as a noble, she gets zero human interaction due to her status and others scheming. No one's gonna scold the daughter of the Archduke. They discuss Rosemine handing over how to make natural yeast for the restaurant, and she declines, because she needs to start trends as an archnoble, and fluffy bread will be her ace in the hole. They plot how to get people to go to the Italian restaurant using Rosemine as marketing. Benno's a bit protective of the operation now that Gustav's involved, but Rosemine tells him that he'll be too busy to focus on the restaurant now that printing is moving. She's even planning on using her power to muscle this operation into cities with no negotiations. Benno thinks she's gone mad with power, and he's not wrong, but it's also just what nobles do, so he's gonna have to accept it. Now before they leave the hidden room, Lutz passes Rosemine a note from her lower city family, and she reads it right away. It's basically just how everyone's doing and how Camille is coming along, which is exactly what she wanted to hear. So she writes back saying she's busy and great otherwise. When they do actually head out of the hidden room, Bridget compliments the meal, and Nicola wants more recipes to make for Rosemine, so she says she'll write some more for her and Ella. On a whim, this kind of inspires her to make a cookbook down the line. She's gonna need more shit to print besides Bibles. The Starbind is almost here, and Lutz tells Rosemine he's gonna do what he did with the orphans last year. She mentions saving some Tau, and he says he will. We also see that Thule isn't around, which bothers Rosemine, but Lutz tells her that she's stupidly busy with work, even studying sewing on her days off by going to the upper city and spending time with Karina. She's been helping Karina with hairpins and absorbing a ton of technical knowledge to keep her promise. Also, Gunther's been promoted to commander of the East Gate too. You know, because the last one got mind killed by letting in a foreign noble, but her family all plan to come see her during the ceremony. At least however close they can get, because they can't actually get into the temple. Rosemine decides to leave for the orphanage and secures an attendant to come. She decides not to interrupt Fran since he's talking to Zom, who's been Rosemine's main liaison with Ferdinand, and she's noticed it's not Arno, but hasn't quite pieced together that Arno's gone entirely. I don't know if she'd even care, to be honest. So she goes to the orphanage proper and informs Wilma that she won't be there because she has to go to the noble quarter. But she's gonna leave not just her chefs behind to cook, she's instructed all the blue priests to cook their usual amount too, even though they'll be gone as well. Delia is also doing fine too, for anyone who cares, as she isn't trying to take care of Dirk all by herself anymore. The ceremony comes and Rosemine makes her way to the chapel, taking the heavy Bible from Monica. The blue robes are all doing the sound blocking thing, and there's like 100 couples in total, all wearing clothes with the color of their birth season. But the main event? The crowd's jaws all drop upon seeing her enter. Right as she gets to the altar, she nearly trips, and Ferdinand saves her by swooping her up and putting her down where she needs to be, silently calling her a fool. He then recites the long story about the king and queen gods getting married before Rosemine's debut. She flips open the Bible and notices the prayers are all scribbled in the margins, pissing her off because she had to memorize them for real. She gives the final prayer and offers a real blessing to the newlyweds. Golden black lights shoot out of her ring and shower all over the commoners, and they lose their shit over getting a real blessing from a noble. The blue robes are all shocked that she did a blessing without a divine instrument, and she thinks for a brief moment that she screwed up. But Ferdinand is smirking. Yeah, his make Rosemine a saint plan is going smoothly so far. When the excited couples all leave the temple, Rosemine notices a group standing in the doorway looking inside, not blending in at all. Yeah, it's her family. She gives a huge smile, but she can't really say or do much. But she shows them the hairpin that Ferdinand gave her, dangling perfectly from her hair. Ferdinand again cements that he's a good guy by turning a blind eye for a bit, until he really can't wait any longer and he has to scoop her up, rushing her off to go eat lunch, because they have to be in the noble quarter pretty soon. While eating, Rosemine asks about the Starbind ceremony from Fran, And it turns out Ferdinand has servants at his estate, so they never really had much to do, and his temple attendants basically just got the day off. Good for them. But remember who the hell trained them. They're all pretty much workaholics. They would end up meeting and talking about work anyways. Ferdinand bursts in as she's finishing her tea, and is annoyed she's not ready yet, so they rush out into a carriage and over to the castle proper. They go to the northern entrance, as that's for personal visits and the family to use, while the southern entrance facing the noble quarter is for business and people who work for the Archduke. We're introduced to some butler-looking guy named Norbert, who's the head attendant to the castle, and this is where things get confusing. So nobles have like 3 jobs. Scholars who do paperwork and run the government, knights who are the main army and protection for the city, and attendants who serve other nobles. Now, it's a choice to be one. There are arch-noble attendants who serve even higher-ranking nobles. Their job is to keep the chambers in order, bathe, dress, and manage the social lives of those they serve. The reason why having someone who can use magic handle these things is obviously beneficial. So yes, there are still some nobles who do minor manual labor, and Norbert is one of those. Rosemine's nights are switched out, where Daniel and Bridget are given the night off to rest, and also go to the ceremony to look for marriage partners themselves. And here's where we're introduced to Rosemine's noble quarter guards. Now, they're apprentices, so they can't leave the quarter to go do work because they haven't come of age yet. We have Angelica, a med-noble who's a stoic beauty, at first glance, because she's actually a complete fucking airhead who doesn't want to think. We'll learn a lot more about her later on. And her second is Rosemine's brother, Cornelius. He's been assigned as her guard as well. We're also introduced to her new head attendant for her noble life, Riarda. She's the widow of an arch-noble with grandchildren, Ferdinand and Sylvester's former wet nurse, and she knows just how to push all their buttons. Riarda's fucking amazing, because she's got some serious no bullshit granny vibes, actually cares about Rosemine, and can whip people into shape. So Rosemine goes to dinner after getting ready, and Sylvester's grand entrance as her dad ensues. She's not quite sure how to address him, but he says just go with his name and no honorifics to keep political distance, but also ensure familiarity. The Italian restaurant comes up as Rosemine asks what he wants, and Sylvester says just give him anything he hasn't eaten before, which is basically the whole menu. Florencia and Wilfred join the meal. We learn that noble kids aren't even allowed to eat dinner with their parents until they're baptized, since they haven't been taught proper manners yet, and it's even worse as according to Ferdinand, Charlotte and Melchior, Sylvester's other 2 children, only see their parents when they say goodnight after they've finished dinner. Yeah, it's actually pretty sad being a noble. Once it's time for bed, Wilfred gives an apology, but she brushes it off, saying it's no big deal, so he heads off to bed, but she's gotta go get ready for the ceremony, which happens at night for nobles. She's quickly changed by Riarda, as well as another attendant named Otilli, all before heading off to the assembly hall. Rosemine nearly trips over her ceremonial robe skirt, and Riarda tells her it's okay to hike it up a bit to avoid that. She's also too fucking slow, so Riarda picks her up anyway and carries her to the hall before 7th bell rings. Once there, she's announced, and Rosemine walks up to an altar where Sylvester's sitting. Now as they sit, she notices that nobles are all off chatting in groups. These are single people looking for marriage partners, and Rosemine spots Bridget along the wall, wearing a very nice dress that doesn't suit her at all, as it doesn't accentuate her more muscular build. A dress is the current trend, and Bridget being a med-noble can't really go against it. Sylvester says that she'll have a hard time finding a match anyway, dress or not, as she previously broke off an engagement when another family tried to bully her elder brother who recently inherited their providence after their father died for control of their land. He was still young at the time, like, just came of age, so 15, so they assumed he was inexperienced, and Bridget would just let their son rule in her brother's place. That's why Bridget volunteered to be Rosemine's guard, to gain the Archduke's adopted daughter's favor. Also, she could help out her big brother. This is actually where her outfit comes up, as Sylvester points out exactly how other people see her with some incredibly accurate insight. And when Rosemine says that she could have an outfit that would look nice on her but just not follow trends, Sylvester suggests she start it. She does have the influence to do that now. Next, they look at Lamprecht, who's actually quite popular, but Karud says he probably won't be marrying any of the women there anytime soon, as he's currently in love with a girl from another duchy who hasn't come of age just yet, and her parents probably won't allow the marriage. Hey, that's what we call foreshadowing. Karud isn't around at all, and we learn that he lost his first wife already, and isn't quite ready to move on to find his second. That's enough backstory though. The Starbind kicks off and 8 couples step forward. Sylvester recites an abridged version of the Bible's tale that he's clearly memorized. unlike Beze wants. Turns out marriages are solidified in the nobles' quarter by contract, as Sylvester calls them up one by one, confirms their intent, and hands them a pen to sign with. Now Rosemine's up, and she offers the final prayer for all the newlyweds, going a bit nuts at Sylvester's instruction, and then is immediately kicked out, because she's underage and isn't allowed to attend the party proper. Now she's super fucking tired, gets carried to her chambers, bathed, and thrown in bed immediately. Ferdinand shows up the next day, expecting her to be bedridden, but Riarda wasn't, and is annoyed at Ferdinand's calm demeanor. He hands her a potion and tells her Rosemine's poor health can't be planned around. All she really needs is rest. Riarda doesn't really want to let him off with just that, but she kinda has to when Rosemine says he made her a potion, despite him being a meanie who won't improve the flavor. Joke's on her though, he actually did, and it's like, palatable now. Once she's a little better, she's back at the temple and asks Daniel if he found a bride, but no such luck due to his still active demotion to apprentice and poor job prospects. She sends off a letter to Benno as soon as she's back in her chambers, and is in turn sent to bed by Fran. The day of the trip to the restaurant comes, and Sylvester arrives well before his scheduled time to bother everyone. With him is a whole host of nobles, because they'll all need guards. So Cardstedt, Ferdinand, Sylvester, Lamprecht, Cornelius, Eckhart, and others. Now if you were paying attention earlier, Cornelius shouldn't technically be allowed, but he's Rosemine's guard, and he's using that as an excuse to get some extra special food. On the ride over, Sylvester complains about the smell, and Rosemine says it would clear up with a proper sewage system. That's foreshadowing. And he's also bitching about the bumpy carriages and says that she should invent something to fix that. That's also foreshadowing. Though everyone there is pretty annoyed that her knowledge doesn't relate to much outside of books. Once they arrive, they draw quite a bit of a crowd, as a bunch of clearly rich people just showed up out of nowhere. And inside, Gustav, Benno, and Frida are all kneeling to greet the nobles. The eatery gets some passing marks in terms of appearance, as that of either a lay noble or even a med noble's estate, and the meal is served before long. It's modeled after a kid's menu at a family restaurant for Sylvester, and everyone loves the food. Ferdinand is surprisingly poetic about the consomme, and everything is a new experience for those eating. Well, except Rosemine. After the meal though comes the real talk. Sylvester demands a report on the printing industry research trip that Benno went on with the scholars, so he could hear it firsthand, and Benno delivers the same info we've already heard. He asks Rosemine what she wants, and she says she wants a small monastery she can run her way without the city interfering, mostly with a focus on paper production. Sylvester agrees to it, so they hash out the details of a smaller building similar to the temple. Ferdinand quickly makes the blueprints, and once it's ready, Sylvester grabs everybody and they head out. To where? That's what all the commoners in Rosemine are confused about. They're off to go make the monastery, right fucking now. How will they do that without tools, or labor? Well, once they set off on High B, shocking all the nearby lower city people, and it's also worth noting here, Sylvester's high beast is a three-headed lion, that being the symbol of Ehrenfest's archducal family, so only the archduke can use a three-headed lion. They get to the nearby city of Haas before long. They find a spot by a forest and a river, and Ferdinand drops down closer to the ground and draws some magic circles with his staff. One circle goes down to the ground, turning the grass into a white clay-like substance, and he throws the blueprints into another magic circle. It burns up, and suddenly the white liquid concrete stuff starts molding on its own into a new mini temple, minus all the wooden fixtures, of course. Once it's done, they go inside and immediately start throwing out a list of all the crap they need, like doors, statues of the gods, carpets, and also tools for the workshop. So Benno and Gustav have to get cracking. I can probably wait till after they shake off the shock of seeing some incredibly high-level magic performed right before their eyes. To cover all these costs, Rosemine says she'll need some funding from Sylvester, and he tells her she already blew it on getting the monastery built. She's being tossed over to Elvira and Florencia to learn how noblewomen gather donations to fund their pet projects, because in noble society, the wealthy just kind of pass money around to one another. That's how that works. Cardstedt wants Rosemine home for this, but Sylvester says that Elvira can come to the castle to help Florencia teach Rosemine. The real thing at stake here is the chefs. After that meal, Cardstedt, Sylvester, and yeah, even Ferdinand are fighting over who gets to have Ella in their kitchen teaching those recipes. Rosemine slips away while they're arguing to talk to Benno and Gustav about how to solve their money problems. That way they can get this place finished. But she can't really help with Sylvester's impatience and tight timetable, as he only gave them 2 months to have this place up and running. So Mark's the one who comes up with the brilliant idea to loan out the chefs, while they push the restaurant's opening back a bit. cover the chef's pay, and they can personally train the noble chefs for a fee, and that'll directly benefit the new industry. So when they get back to the restaurant, she essentially puts the chefs out on loan for 5 large silvers a month, and of course 1 small gold per recipe taught. Ferdinand jumps on that because he's rich as fuck, and Karudstedt reluctantly tries to take Hugo, as Sylvester can't move that much money without a scholar present. But as they argue, Rosemine has a great idea to have Karudstedt's chef come to the castle to learn from Hugo as well. That way they can both get his knowledge. Now it's time for Rosemine to learn how to get donations. So Florencia and Elvira host a tea party, inviting all the members of their faction. They're showcasing some of Rosemine's sweets, both pound cake and Swiss rolls, though the noble women all interpret this to mean that her mother's chefs actually made them. They pitch this as an opportunity to meet the Archduke's adopted daughter, as well as tell people, in brief, about the new industry, or rather stating that they're making money for a new industry, and the nobles just sort of throw money at them as a show of gratitude for previous assistance, with no one actually giving a shit about the industry and assuming Rosemine's name is just being attached to it. But I guess that doesn't really matter in the end because they did get a shit ton of money. Afterwards, she's resting in bed and Ferdinand arrives, but Riarda isn't around, so Bridget informs her, which is not her job, and she looks pretty troubled. Riarda appears with some tea and says that she had Sylvester summon him so that they could talk about her health. Elvira and Florencia tagged along too so they could give their input, as despite collapsing at a tea party, Rosemine can't shirk that aspect of society. It comes down to donations are important, need to be given by goodwill and not as an order, which a request with her status would essentially be. Finally, Rosemine throws out some additional ideas to gather money, and she settles on a charity concert. Now this is a first for this world, as she talks about selling tickets, it not being mandatory, and tries to rope Ferdinand into performing, as he's a bit of a rock star in noble society. He refuses, of course, and she tries to entice him with more recipes and sheet music, but she needs another push and just doesn't have it. So Riarda backs her up by saying Rosemine's putting her all into this, and he should help her out of the goodness of his heart, so he agrees regretfully, and leaves in a huff. They have to schedule this quickly though, and after she conveys how this all works and gets everyone on board, with Florencia buying one of the cheaper tickets away from the stage to advertise it's not based on status, it's settled. Or not, because Rosemine's feeling a bit spiteful towards Ferdinand for being so stingy, decides to have Wilma draw a beautiful picture of him so that they can print it, and sell them at the concert to raise some money, as well as a bit of revenge. So after that, it's scheduled for a month out, they tell Ferdinand by ordinance, and he replies that that works. But Rosemine now has magic training, starting tomorrow. He conveyed in a really chilly voice that everyone picked up on, which kinda turned on Elvira. The next day, Ferdinand stops by, gives her a few books on magic to study, which she's happy about because hey, new books, but she doesn't quite realize this is actually a trap and part of his revenge, as she's not going to be given any time to read them. She's then dragged to the knight's training ground and given a large face stone to turn into her high beast. He explains that she needs to pour mana into it, and teaches her how to do so from a distance. This makes it easier for her to use, but also harder for others. Which on the flip side, doing so with ingredients makes them better for your own potions and magic tool creation. Her first exercise here is to make it grow, which she does quite easily, though her mental image for that is a balloon. And as it gets bigger and bigger, she starts to worry that it might pop, and it suddenly does. Ferdinand shields her and asks her why the hell she just did that, and she replies that it just kinda sorta happened. Yeah, this is your first hint. She just learned that these things are super responsive to mental images. Ferdinand's just annoyed she wasted a pretty precious face stone, but when she imagines the dust it left behind as clay and rolls it back together, it starts to stick and form a face stone again, much to Ferdinand's shock and annoyance, as that shouldn't work. Yeah, after that, they're fucking done for the day. And this is where Ferdinand springs his trap, telling her the books are from the castle, cannot leave, and she has to go to the temple since she's healthy again. So now she vows to make those illustrations of Ferdinand full color, just out of spite. Before she leaves for the temple, she bumps into Wilfred, who's acting kinda weird. He tells her it's not fair and leaves, which we won't understand what that's about until a later volume. In her room, she wishes she had a diptych to make notes on, and when she goes to the temple, there's already a meeting with the Gilberta company scheduled. She announces that she's tired of Ferdinand's shit and plans to finish the wax stencils immediately, so that way she can exact her revenge. Benno's pissed off that she's trying to add work to people when they're already struggling to finance this new orphanage, but she brushes it off, saying she has the money already, and he should be used to this by now, but of course, he's blown away. He then hands her a brand new noble level diptych as thanks to the big connections he's made, which mine loves because hey, she was just thinking about that. Benno's dismissed, and she talks to Lutz and Gil about the wax stencils, which they're having no luck with because they're cracking. Two things, they'll need better wax with tree resin mixed in, and she says summon Johan so that they can make a roller, since money isn't an issue now, but in the meantime, they'll need some trombe paper. Her guards try to follow her, but she instructs Bridget to wait outside, as while she trusts her, she lies and says that there's some trade secrets down below she doesn't want a landowning noble to have, and she blackmails Daniel to close his eyes as they farm some trombe wood. That way a noble doesn't learn that Tau are actually trombe. However, instead of using her mana, she instructs Delia to bring Dirk over and uses his mana to drain him of his excess. He still doesn't have a ton since Bezewant's drained him dry, but it's worth keeping him low. After he goes back inside and she shoves down her thoughts about Camille, she then finishes off the rest to get a trombe to pop out. Once they have some wood, she summons Wilma and asks her to draw Ferdinand, but she says she hasn't actually seen him before, as when he visited, she didn't look him in the face. Remember, she's scared of blue robe priests? Wilma says to have Rosina sketch him and she'll finish the art from that. So Rosemine goes ahead, asks Rosina, and she's pretty happy to because she thinks he's pretty cute, which is then delivered to Wilma. Fran comes back about this time and says they can't meet with Ferdinand despite him calling her to the temple, because he has a sudden visitor. Yeah, she's pretty pissed off about that, but he says that she can go ahead and look through the locked bookshelf Bezewant's had a key to. Now those are some books she hasn't read before. That brightens her mood right up, so she races off to do so. However, that bookshelf wasn't actually full of books, but a box that was carved to look like books. It's actually filled with letters and documents. Some are relating to Bezewant's embezzlement and wraps up other nobles and his crimes, while others are what she assumes to be love letters to an unknown noble woman who is forced to marry outside the duchy, thus kicking her out of the line of succession for her house. Rosemine thinks this is nice, sweet, and kind of a redeeming moment for the asshole Bezewants, so she decides not to share those with Ferdinand, but the rest, yeah, she'll hand those over, with the request that she can keep the box because, again, it looks like books. Before that though, Wilma has a request to see Ferdinand to draw him properly, which she was pretty pushy with because apparently she likes him. And so when he comes to her chambers to get the music he was promised, she has Wilma come to draw as well. As a bit of a joke, she gives Ferdinand an anime song about friendship and heroics, but he turns it into a really passionate love song about the god of life and earth. This is so powerful it moistens the panties of all the women in the room. It even has Fran and Daniel enraptured. Suddenly she's worried Ferdinand might actually be weapons-grade dangerous at this concert, and makes a mental note to beef up security while preparing a fainting room just in case. The next day, Johan comes and Zach tags along as well, all to ask Rosemine to dump the former and pick him up as her Gutenberg instead. However, she's in her high bishop's robes, and through some clever phrasing, has Johan pick up that she was a blue shrine maiden who snuck out to play in the lower city, and now he'll have to come to her instead of her going to his workshop. Zach's super invested in this because he thinks the title means best craftsman, and Rosemine says she'll pit them against one another for designs. Yeah, the problem here is pretty clear. Johan struggles with vague instructions, but Zach excels at creativity, so he asks as long as it accomplishes the goal, will it be fine? Rosemine says yes. She confirms the program with Ferdinand to see what he'll play, explains what the program even is, and he wants final approval on that. That means she'll have to use the simplified silhouette art if the wax stencils aren't ready yet, but afterwards heads to Wilma's room to see that she's been possessed by the creative spirit, and has covered her room in not just art of Ferdinand, but stuff that's been clearly filtered through rose-colored glasses. So she gets a stencil made, it doesn't quite look enough like Ferdinand to draw suspicion, gets his approval, and cue Johan and Zach coming back with their blueprints. Johan had no luck, but Zach made multiple different designs. She asks which would work better, and there's two candidates. One that would be best, but it's too precise to be feasible, and a more realistic one. Johan jumps on the precise one because he can totally do it, but Zach takes the realistic one, and they compete to see who can finish theirs first. After that meeting, Lutz slips Rosemine a letter saying that they have a particular craftswoman who specializes in hairpins who'd like to meet her and show her a new design. She immediately picks up on that it's Thule and says bring her over. The next day, Thule comes over, and they both hold back as she presents a new hairpin to the noble Rosemine. As a gift, she gives Thule a picture book for Camille, with a letter inside for the family, and she mentions that they have a new baby in the orphanage, and asks Thule if she has any experience with babies. That's a cue right there to tell her former sister how Camille is doing. which Thule handles like a pro. Once Thule leaves, Rosemind talks to Gil and Lutz about preparing to print the programs. She says they're selling 30 tickets, so they'll need 90 programs, but they say that's too much and will be a waste. Rosemind, on the other hand, thinks it won't actually be enough, as people will want more than one, and tells Lutz to either settle on 90 or round up to 100. She's helping Ferdinand with the budget later, where we learn that he's been high priest for about 2 years now, after his predecessor went to the sovereignty, and he's still unsure what Bezewants blew all their budget on with his embezzlement. Suddenly an ordinance flies in, and Lamprecht wishes to speak with Rosemind about Wilfred. He's also not so subtly saying he wants to eat lunch, and is also bringing Elvira, as Kartstedt and Cornelius probably bragged about the Italian restaurant's food. So when they come, it turns out Wilfred is upset that Rosemind isn't being forced to study like he is, and also thinks that she's getting all of Sylvester's attention. Basically, during dinner, he kinda wants to brag to his dad about all the crap he's doing, but since he's skipping out on classes, he has jack shit to talk about. However, the shocking thing here is, Wilfred isn't even literate yet, and he's meant to study certain topics with Rosemind, like geography and history before they enter the Royal Academy. But that's on hold since he doesn't even know his letters. Lamprecht wants Rosemind to study with him once so that he can see the gap between them, but Ferdinand shoots that down as she already has a full plate. Also, she's being educated by Ferdinand himself, and doesn't take much prodding to learn when a book is placed in front of her. After lunch, Ferdinand leaves, and the concert comes up as they need to add seats and go over the program. She also asks Lamprecht about stationing knights, and he's kinda skeptical about that, but Rosemind is confident after hearing Ferdinand practice those new songs. To prove this point, she unfurls Wilma's illustration of Ferdinand right in front of Elvira, who practically drools. And after that, they agree they're going to need to set aside a medical room, as well as have some security present. Skipping ahead a little bit, and after hearing about Johann and Zach's progress, it's time to finish her high beast. They go to the training ground, practice changing the shape of the face stone, and Ferdinand instructs Rosemind to make a stone big enough to ride on, and then sculpt it into some sort of animal. As he's explaining, the only thing that popped into her mind was a kid's ride at an amusement park modeled after a red panda, like one that rocks back and forth. Yeah, that's not really movable. So he says go with a lion as it's the symbol of the Archduke, and children of the Archduke are permitted to use it, though it's not mandatory. Now she thinks the realistic lion that Ferdinand rides on is scary, so she goes with the cutesy cartoon one instead, and gets told her artistic sense is garbage again. But she wants one that she'll ride, and ends up imagining the cat bus from Totoro, but with a lion head that only makes Ferdinand grimace because, again, she sucks at art. So he tells her to go ahead and just make whatever, that way it's not ruining the image of the duchy, and it gets simplified down to a red panda again. So now she has a panda bus. Vehicles are supposedly a no-go, at least according to their wisdom. As we've already talked about, people in this world lack concepts of anthropomorphism. We saw that in the temple where the kids couldn't quite picture an animal talking. But here she just made a panda bus, one that she can enter, as well as add seats and make storage. Yeah, her high beast is incredibly unorthodox, but it flies and that's all that really matters, as well as having a ton of utility that we'll see later on. Though, according to everybody who looks at it, it looks like a particularly nasty fey beast called a grun. On the inside it has a steering wheel, gear shift, pedals, and even seatbelts because Urano had her driver's license. So she can pretty easily picture the inside of a car. We're finally introduced at long last to Rosemind's high beast, her infamous panda bus named Lessie, or Lesser Panda. Back at the temple, the wax rollers are ready, and Zach's is functional, but Johann's isn't quite done yet, so Zach wins by default, and we get a successful run on wax paper. This is where he's told that Gutenberg just means somebody who's wrapped up in the printing industry, and going to be insanely busy. Sucks to be him. Once Wilma gets the art carved, it's time to print, and hey, it actually goes perfectly. Now it's time for the concert. Elvira and Florencia see what printing can actually do with the illustrations from Wilma, and this is definitely going to be a massive success. Before Ferdinand actually arrives, they sell some of the programs, as well as his favorite cookies. But once he's on stage, the merch disappears, and he plays. As expected, his playing literally gets the girls all hyped up, but in the middle of this performance for a sold-out crowd of horny noblewomen and daughters, Rosemind is called out of the hall by Eckhart, who's accompanied by Sylvester, which they thought Florencia took care of, but he caught wind and jumped at the chance to have some fun, so she butters him up, saying that he can end the concert as the Archduke. When the show's about over, she rushes on stage and announces that Ehrenfest himself is there to conclude with one final song, and Ferdinand's pretty annoyed, but not much they can do about it. They play a song everyone knows and get a standing ovation as the two men leave, and that's when the merch comes out again. some of the less well-off nobles are debating what to get and really pour over their purses. Because, there's like 3 different illustrations, cookies, and the program, all of which are being sold for a decent profit. At the end of the day, they're all sold out, which means this was a huge success. Several days after the concert, though, Rosemine is called into Ferdinand's hidden room, where he lays out the illustrations and says that Sylvester caught a night with them, and that immediately led to him teasing Ferdinand endlessly. Lucky for him, though, the culprit was dumb enough to put her name and print date on the back of each. Foiled by printing traditions once again, Rosemine got caught, and has been banned from using Ferdinand's likeness to sell goods again. The epilogue picks up with going over the profits of the concert, where Benno is thoroughly impressed, though they won't be hosting another one, since Ferdinand found out. Apparently they pulled in over 10 large golds of profit, which, as we know at this point, is a ton of fucking money. The monastery is coming along as Ingo is there with his wife finishing it, and even Lutz's dad died is helping out. But they need to meet with Rosemine and discuss some things as well as deliver the new hairpin she ordered. And Lutz says they should bring Thule along so that she can practice in the hidden room. After all, that's kinda how he got good, practicing with mine. In the hidden room, Thule is a bit rough with the item, but Rosemine tells her there's no need to rush and be careful. She demonstrates how a noble would take something out of a simple box, and she shocks Lutz by just how elegantly she's moving. Benno's impressed she learned how to do that so quickly too, and tells Thule to give it a shot by mimicking her. It turns into a proper lesson, as they all use formal speech to teach Thule how to do business with nobles, as she'll need to in the future. Seeing how far Rosemine's come in such a short time since mine died, Lutz has a bit of an existential crisis, as he had deluded himself into thinking she hadn't changed, when in reality, she had. Now he questions if he himself is changing, and actually improving, so he resolves to himself to work even harder. Well, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at the side stories. This time, which is actually pretty standard by now, we get some more insight into the side characters and how they feel about the rapidly changing events around them. Starting off with being my little sister's night from Cornelius' perspective, it's the night he's told about Rosemine from his mother, and Eckhardt's there as well. He's up in arms about a temple girl, let alone Rosemary's daughter, being brought into their house and being adopted by the Archduke. Eckhart says she was raised by Ferdinand, so she's already a model archnoble, but Cornelius is skeptical. Elvira says that he'll be guarding her once she's adopted, and he's not pleased about that either, as he had no interest in following in his family's footsteps by becoming a retainer of the Archduke's family. However, he's chosen for political reasons, as no one else is willing, or could even be trusted to. So the day Rosemine comes to the estate arrives, and while Ferdinand and Elvira are talking about her education, Cornelius sees her as a scared little girl thrown into the deep end, and tosses her a lifeline by striking up a conversation to put her at ease, saying that she'll be fine, and he'll be proud to have her as his little sister. Seeing that she relaxes, Cornelius feels a bit better too. After a bit at the estate, seeing her study so hard makes Cornelius sympathize with her more, as he thinks she needs to get out, enjoy herself, and play a bit, that way she's not just reading all the time. However, after spending more time with her, seeing how nice she is, and that flipping his perception of temple-raised nobles, he gets to know her more. So he asks her if there's anything that she wants to do, and that of course means that she wants to read. Despite not wanting to, Cornelius agrees to take her to the house's bookroom, because he thinks that's all she's ever known, so he feels kinda bad for her. Also, Ferdinand said that would be best, so he decides to take her there, and she praises the gods immediately. However, on the trip after getting so excited about new books, she collapses out of nowhere, scaring the shit out of Cornelius. As we all expected, Ferdinand says that was the easiest way for him to teach him why Rosemine couldn't go outside, and also why reading's just the best thing for her. He explains why he was chosen as her knight, mostly because of his status, that way he can order around her lesser retainers, and also because they're family. The lesson seems to have stuck, to the surprise of Ferdinand because that rarely happens, that it's his duty to protect Rosemine until she can choose her own retainers. And Cornelius suggests teaching Wilfred, as well as his grandfather, just how weak Rosemine is in the same way that he was. So that's who was behind the plot during her baptism. Ferdinand just did what Cornelius wanted. Next up is one stressed out chef, from Hugo's perspective. The key point here is Hugo has himself a girlfriend, but he's being taken to the Archduke's estate for a month. Now it's right after the Starbind ceremony, so they can't exactly go and get married until next year. Also, the prep for the big meal was pretty hard, as Lise is the hotshot chef in town, and they're all trying to prove themselves to her. Hugo ends up gaining himself some respect by making a really top-notch consommé. But when it comes time, Todd is sent off to Ferdinand's room at the temple, while Hugo sticks with Ella and Rosemine when they go off to the castle. Basically, Hugo's gonna have to protect Ella, as they're both gonna be doing the teaching in a noble estate. Ella came of age during spring, but missed the ceremony because she was in the noble quarter with Rosemine. Before they leave, Hugo resolves himself to ask his girlfriend's dad for permission to marry her next summer, and Ella teases him about them breaking up while he's away. So that's it for context this volume, and it's certainly a lot to take in. But in that same vein, it's also a return to form for the series. After those dire stakes last volume, we get to see our protagonist just being herself again, though with some new struggles. Minor ones at first, but yeah, they're gonna balloon out of proportions. You know how this goes. But that's for future videos. Let's go ahead and look at this one more in depth and wrap it up with my thoughts. Part 3, Volume 1 is a sort of soft reset. The characters are the same, but with a whole new cast thrown into the mix, a new setting, and a new way of life. It feels like an entire refresh for the series. And much like in Part 1, it has to lay the groundwork for what we're going to experience in the coming story. In fact, it shares a lot of DNA with that book in particular, as it reestablishes the status quo. Who the primary group we're following is, Rosemine, her knights, Ferdinand, Cardstead, Sylvester, Elvira, Florencia, and Wilfred, how these people relate and interact, while also showing their roles in the story. Much like we did with Mine's Lower City family, Lutz's family, and Otto in Part 1. But instead of exploring the lower city and forest, Rosemine's now learning the ropes of high society, while also trying to balance her inventions and desire for new books. All while work is piled on her to start the new industry to propel Ehrenfest to new heights. Though the parallels don't stop by just mirroring the basic structure. Rosemine is still the daughter of a military man, her mother is an ideal woman in her class, and her closest brother is looking out for her like Tully did. She's back in the unfamiliar, as her world changed overnight from a familiar setting to now dealing with vague nobles she can barely parse, along with a whole host of new expectations, as her higher status means all eyes are on her. It takes the basic premise it's already used and reinvents it in an organic way, as Rosemine basically relives a second reincarnation, where her old self, Mine, is dead. And where this volume shines is in the almost slice-of-life approach to telling the story. It knows we just went through a roller coaster last book, and gives us the stability we desperately needed by grounding the audience, as well as Rosemine, in her new life. It takes a slow, even pace, as it explores the new concepts thrown at us like magic, noble culture, and changes in the lower city and temple, all while hinting at the grander scope the franchise is heading towards, by opening up the new monastery, and the talks at the printing industry. But what this did well is establish and foreshadow the key goals and tensions in this part, showcasing the incredibly interconnectedness in the part as a whole. Part 1 bled together in a way that didn't really have strong climaxes until the very end, with a lot of the volumes just sort of coming to a close. And Part 2 had the opposite problem. It seemed more interested in small climaxes for its volumes. But Part 3 feels like it's meant to be a single book told in 5 parts. By showing Rosemine's mission to get the potion and fix her body, hinting how taxing that'll be for her, and also adding some foreshadowing with the letters between Bezewanst and an unknown woman. These are the events on the horizon that we know will shape not just the story, but Rosemine's future, leaving us plenty to look forward to. Part 3 is still relatively personal with Rosemine, but expanding outwardly into the world quickly, especially from this point onward, as this was sort of our base camp for getting us comfortable with noble society. And Rosemine exploring the duchy and spreading her influence comes next, through not just printing, but also her mission to make her Jarif potion. Next time we'll find out more, as there's problems gathering on the horizon, as well as with her new orphanage she's starting, and gathering's not going to go as smoothly as she thought. But hey, for now, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description. If you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. Thanks for watching.